What if the lost city of Atlantis wasn't just a legend? Or if the Trojan War wasn't merely a story spun by poets? For centuries, these ancient myths have captivated our imaginations, dismissed by some as mere fables, tales told around fires to explain the unexplainable. But what if the truth is far more extraordinary? Hidden beneath layers of soil and time, archaeologists have uncovered startling evidence that blurs the line between myth and history. These aren't just stories, they're echoes of real events waiting to be rediscovered. Picture this, a team of researchers brushing dust from a shattered clay tablet, their fingers tracing symbols that match descriptions from a myth thousands of years old. Or a diver emerging from the depths, holding an artifact that aligns perfectly with an ancient sailor's account. These moments aren't fiction, they're happening right now, rewriting what we thought we knew about our past. From the sunken ruins that might inspire Atlantis to the battle-scarred walls of Troy, the evidence is mounting, and it's more compelling than ever. This journey isn't just about dusting off old relics, it's about unraveling the threads of human memory, stretching back further than we ever imagined. Why do these stories endure? Because somewhere deep down, they carry truths we've always sensed. Over the next 30 revelations, we'll explore myths from every corner of the globe, each supported by jaw-dropping archaeological finds. You'll see how legends of floods, giants, and lost civilizations might not be so far-fetched after all. So, are you ready to step into the shadows of history and uncover what's been hiding in plain sight? The past is calling, and it has secrets to share. The Trojan War, one of the most legendary conflicts in history, immortalized by Homer in the Iliad. For centuries, scholars debated whether it was pure myth or rooted in reality. Then, in the late 19th century, a self-taught archaeologist named Heinrich Schliemann became obsessed with proving Homer right. Convinced that Troy wasn't just a poetic invention, he set his sights on a site in modern-day Turkey called Hisarlik. What he uncovered would shake the foundations of history. Digging through layer after layer of ruins, Schliemann found not just one city, but multiple, each built atop the ruins of the last. Among them was a level showing signs of violent destruction, with charred walls and scattered weapons. This, he declared, had to be the Troy of legend, the city besieged by Greek armies for 10 long years. His most famous discovery, a hoard of gold jewels, cups, and ornaments he dramatically dubbed the Treasure of Priam, after the fabled king of Troy. But Schliemann's methods were far from perfect. In his reckless enthusiasm, he blasted through layers of history with little regard for careful documentation, destroying as much as he uncovered. Critics argued he cherry-picked evidence to fit Homer's narrative, even sneaking in artifacts to bolster his claims. The so-called Treasure of Priam might not have even belonged to Troy's royal family. Some suspect it came from a much older settlement buried beneath. Yet despite the controversy, later excavations at Hisarlik confirmed something remarkable. The city's layout, its strategic location, and evidence of warfare around 1200 BC all suggest a kernel of truth behind the Iliad's epic tale. Could the Trojan War have been a real conflict, distorted and amplified by centuries of oral storytelling? The ruins whisper yes, and while Schliemann's legacy is messy, his relentless pursuit forced the world to confront a tantalizing possibility that some myths aren't just stories. They're history waiting to be unearthed. Deep within the island of Crete lies a tale so gripping it's echoed through millennia, the story of Theseus and the Minotaur. According to legend, King Minos of Crete demanded a gruesome tribute from Athens. 7 young men and 7 maidens, sent every 9 years to be devoured by a monstrous half-man, half-bull trapped in an inescapable labyrinth. That is, until the hero Theseus volunteered, armed with only a sword and a ball of thread, to slay the beast and end the nightmare. For centuries, this story was dismissed as pure fantasy until British archaeologist Arthur Evans began digging at Knossos in the early 20th century. What he uncovered would make even the most skeptical historian pause. Evans' excavations revealed an enormous palace complex so vast and intricate, its corridors twisted like a maze. Walls adorned with vibrant frescoes depicted acrobats leaping over charging bulls, a ritual that may have inspired the Minotaur's legend, even more striking. The palace's very design, with its bewildering staircases, sudden dead ends, and chambers stacked upon chambers, matched ancient descriptions of the labyrinth itself. Could this have been the real-life setting for the myth? But here's where the debate ignites. Some scholars argue the labyrinth was purely symbolic, a metaphor for the complexity of Minoan society or even the twists of the afterlife. Others point to artifacts like the famous Minoan bull leaping fresco, suggesting the Minotaur might represent a distorted memory of actual rituals where young athletes vaulted over sacred bulls in a dangerous display of skill. And then there's the eerie discovery of child bones at Knossos, fueling theories of human sacrifice echoing the myth's grim tribute. Evans himself was convinced Knossos was the heart of the legend, though modern archaeology warns against oversimplifying. The truth likely lies in layers, just like the palace ruins, a blend of architectural wonder, cultural practice, and the human desire to explain the unexplainable. Whether the Minotaur walked these halls or not, one thing is certain: the line between myth and reality is far thinner than we ever imagined. And sometimes the most fantastical stories are just waiting for a trowel to uncover them. From the icy peaks of the Andes to the sun-baked plains of Mesopotamia, nearly every ancient culture tells the same terrifying story: the world drowned beneath a cataclysmic flood. The biblical tale of Noah's Ark is the most famous, but long before that account was written, the Mesopotamians were already recounting their own version in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Here, the hero Utnapishtim is warned by the gods to build a massive boat, fill it with animals, and ride out the deluge that would wipe humanity from the earth. For years, scholars dismissed this as fiction until archaeologist Leonard Woolley made a jaw-dropping discovery in the 1920s. Digging through the ancient city of Woolley's team hit something unexpected: a layer of clean, water-laid silt nearly 3 meters thick, separating two distinct periods of civilization. Below it lay the ruins of an advanced society, above, fragments of a culture starting anew. The conclusion was inescapable: a flood of unimaginable scale had once swallowed this land. Radiocarbon dating placed the disaster around 2900 BCE, a time frame that eerily overlaps with flood myths across the region. Suddenly, the story of Utnapishtim didn't seem so far-fetched. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. Similar flood layers have been found at other Mesopotamian sites like Kish and Shuruppak, hinting at a regional catastrophe. Yet while Woolley initially believed this was the biblical flood, modern geologists think otherwise. The silt at suggests a massive Euphrates River flood devastating for local cities but not worldwide. So why do flood myths span cultures separated by oceans? Some point to melting glaciers at the end of the last ice age, when rising sea levels swallowed coastal settlements. Others argue these stories reflect universal human trauma, the collective memory of disasters that reshaped early societies. The truth might lie somewhere in between. The Epic of Gilgamesh could preserve the memory of Mesopotamia's great flood, while other cultures adapted the theme to explain their own cataclysms. What's undeniable is this: when the ancients spoke of waters swallowing the earth, they weren't just spinning tales. They were passing down warnings etched in clay and buried in silt, waiting for us to listen. Plato's tale of Atlantis, a mighty island nation swallowed by the sea in a single day and night, has fueled speculation for over 2,000 years. In his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, he describes a utopian society brimming with advanced technology, monumental architecture, and unimaginable wealth, only to be punished by the gods for its hubris. Many dismissed it as a moral fable, but what if Plato was recording a distorted memory of a real catastrophe? One compelling theory points to the volcanic island of Thera, modern-day Santorini, and the devastating eruption that obliterated the Minoan civilization around 1600 BC. The parallels are striking. Thera's eruption was one of the most violent in recorded history, with explosions heard hundreds of miles away and tsunamis that may have reached Crete just 70 miles to the south. Excavations at Akrotiri, a Minoan settlement on Thera, reveal a sophisticated society frozen in time, multi-story buildings with vivid frescoes, advanced drainage systems, and artifacts suggesting widespread trade. Then, in an instant, it vanished under meters of volcanic ash. Could this have been the inspiration for Atlantis's downfall? Archaeologists have uncovered more eerie clues. The Minoans, like Plato's Atlanteans, were master seafarers with a labyrinthine palace at Knossos echoing Atlantis's concentric rings of water and land. The eruption's timing also aligns with the abrupt decline of Minoan influence, a collapse that would have reverberated across the Mediterranean. Even Plato's description of Atlantis sinking matches Thera's caldera, a vast crater formed when the volcano's center collapsed into the sea. Yet skeptics argue Plato's account is too precise. Atlantis was said to lie beyond the Pillars of Hercules, placing it in the Atlantic, not the Aegean. Others suggest he merged multiple disasters, from the Sea People's invasions to local floods. But perhaps the most tantalizing possibility is that Atlantis was never a single place. Instead, it could be a mosaic of forgotten tragedies, a warning woven from the threads of real civilizations lost to time. Whether myth or memory, one thing is clear: the story of Atlantis endures because it speaks to our deepest fears of nature's wrath and of empires that vanish beneath the waves. The hanging gardens of Babylon, lush terraces dripping with exotic plants, an oasis suspended above the desert, counted among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. But here's the twist: despite their fame, no trace of them has ever been found in Babylon. Not a single inscription, not one crumbling brick. For centuries, historians scratched their heads, wondering if the gardens were pure legend, until a bold theory emerged. What if they weren't in Babylon at all? Oxford scholar Stephanie Daly turned the mystery upside down when she pieced together clues from ancient texts and reliefs. The key lay in Assyrian inscriptions from Nineveh, Babylon's rival to the north. One description stood out: King Sennacherib's palace complex, where he boasted of an unrivaled paradise with towering terraces, flowing canals, and ingenious screw pumps to lift water from the nearby Tigris River. Sound familiar? Daly noticed something even more telling: a sculpted panel from Sennacherib's reign showing a lush garden cascading down a mountainside, its tiers held aloft by stone columns. The detail was uncanny. Then came the clincher. Ancient accounts often confused Nineveh with Babylon. Both were colossal Mesopotamian cities, both were conquered by the Persians, and both names blurred together over centuries of retelling. Even Greek historians like Strabo might have mixed them up, but Daly's most compelling evidence: the Assyrians were engineering geniuses. Their aqueducts and irrigation systems, some still visible today, could have delivered water to those soaring gardens without breaking a sweat. One canal system, carved into cliffs near Nineveh, bears an inscription calling it Sennacherib's masterpiece, designed to make the desert bloom. Skeptics counter that without physical ruins, the theory remains speculative. Yet recent satellite imagery reveals ghostly outlines near Mosul, modern-day Nineveh, that match descriptions of sprawling terraced structures. Whether the gardens were in Babylon, Nineveh, or somewhere in between, their legacy endures because they speak to something timeless: humanity's longing to conquer the impossible, to make life flourish against all odds. And if Daly's right, it means one of history's greatest wonders wasn't lost just waiting for us to look in the right place. High atop the slopes of Mount Parnassus, shrouded in swirling mist, the Oracle of Delphi sat at the center of the ancient world's most sacred mystery. For over 1,000 years, kings, generals, and ordinary pilgrims journeyed to this remote sanctuary, desperate for guidance from the Pythia. the priestess who channeled the god Apollo's wisdom. According to legend, she'd descend into a hidden chamber beneath the temple of Apollo, inhale vapors rising from a crack in the earth, and slip into a divine frenzy. Her cryptic prophecies uttered in riddles shaped empires, but was this just theatrical ritual, or could there be science behind the sacred trance? The ruins of Delphi held the first clue. Excavations in the late 19th century uncovered the temple's foundations, including a small, enclosed space beneath the main hall, exactly where ancient sources described the Pythia's underground chamber. But the real breakthrough came decades later when geologists studied the site's unique geology. Delphi sits atop two intersecting fault lines where seismic activity once fractured the bedrock. Tests revealed something astonishing: traces of ethylene, a sweet-smelling gas known to induce euphoria, altered consciousness, and even hallucinations at high concentrations. Suddenly, the Pythia's visions took on a startling new light. Here's where history and chemistry collide. Ethylene rises from such fissures in gentle pulses, matching ancient accounts of the Pythia prophesying only on certain days, likely when gas concentrations peak. Victims of industrial ethylene leaks report sensations eerily similar to the oracle's described trances: a floating detachment, garbled speech, and disjointed bursts of insight. Even the temple's design may have amplified the effect. The chamber's low ceiling would have trapped the vapors, creating a potent brew for the priestess to breathe. Yet mysteries linger. Why did the prophecies stop by the 4th century CE? Some speculate earthquakes sealed the fissures, cutting off the gas. Others argue the Pythia's role evolved. Early accounts describe her as an incoherent conduit, while later ones portray her reciting polished verses, suggesting the gas's influence waned or rituals became more staged. But perhaps the most fascinating twist is how modern science echoes ancient intuition. The Greeks believed Delphi was the omphalos, the navel of the world where divine forces seeped into our realm. In a way, they weren't wrong. The earth itself spoke here, not through magic, but through hidden currents of gas and stone. And for centuries, humanity listened. Herodotus spun tales of fierce warrior women, the Amazons, who lived beyond the known world, cutting off one breast to better draw their bows and riding into battle alongside Scythian nomads. For centuries, historians dismissed these accounts as Greek fantasy, a way to demonize foreign cultures as savage or unnatural. But then, archaeologists began unearthing burial mounds across the Eurasian steppe from Russia to Ukraine, and the soil told a different story altogether. One such kurgan, dug open in the 1990s near the town of Pokrovka, held a skeleton buried with an iron dagger, a quiver of arrows, and a bent sword, items reserved for warriors. The bones showed signs of brutal combat, a skull fractured by an axe blow, ribs notched by arrow strikes. Yet when researchers examined the pelvis, they made a startling realization: this was no male fighter. This was a woman laid to rest with the same honors as any Scythian chieftain, and she wasn't alone. Dozens of similar graves emerged, women buried with bows, armor, and even chariots. Some showed healed battle wounds, proof they'd survived and returned to the fray. The evidence didn't stop there. DNA analysis confirmed these women weren't just occasional anomalies. Nearly a third of Scythian warrior graves belonged to females. Their bones bore the telltale marks of a life on horseback, thickened femurs from gripping saddles, spinal deformities from constant riding. Even their tattoos matched those described by Herodotus, intricate animal designs pricked into their skin, symbols of status and strength. But here's where myth and reality diverge. The Greeks painted the Amazons as man-hating renegades, but Scythian women fought alongside men as equals. Their graves often lie beside husbands and brothers, all interred with the same weapons, and that single-breast legend, pure fabrication, not a single skeleton shows such mutilation. The truth is far more fascinating. These weren't the monsters of Greek propaganda. They were part of a culture where skill, not gender, dictated who rode to war. Why does this matter? Because it rewrites our understanding of ancient societies. The Amazons weren't just myth, they were real women whose lives were distorted by outsiders who couldn't fathom their way of life. And now, thanks to the silent testimony of bones and bronze, their story is finally being told not as a fable but as history. The legend of the Golden Fleece, a treasure so coveted that Jason and his Argonauts braved monsters and storms to steal it from a distant kingdom. But what if this wasn't just a tale of heroism? What if the fleece was real, not as a magical artifact, but as a clever ancient technology? Enter Colchis, a wealthy kingdom nestled along the Black Sea in what's now modern Georgia, where gold wasn't just mined, it was literally pulled from rivers using sheepskins. Archaeologists working in the region have uncovered something extraordinary: ancient tools and artifacts that match descriptions of gold processing methods dating back over 3,000 years. Here's how it worked. Miners would submerge sheepskins in fast-flowing mountain streams, where flecks of gold dust clung to the wool's greasy fibers. After drying, the fleeces were shaken or beaten to release the precious metal, a rudimentary but effective form of gold collection. Imagine Jason's shock if he'd arrived in Colchis expecting a glittering trophy, only to find laborers wringing gold from soggy pelts. But the evidence goes deeper. Excavations at Vani, a major Colchian settlement, revealed intricately crafted gold jewelry and ceremonial objects, proving the region's mastery of metallurgy. Even more telling, local folklore still speaks of golden wool, passed down through generations. The myth's roots might lie in Colchis's real-world reputation as a land of gold, a place so rich its very rivers seem to spill treasure. Yet the Argonaut story adds another layer. Greek traders venturing east would have encountered Colchis's wealth firsthand, marveling at techniques they couldn't replicate. Over time, fact blurred into legend. The fleece transformed from a mining tool into a symbol of unattainable riches, guarded by a dragon in the collective imagination. It's a pattern we've seen before: ordinary innovation, exaggerated into myth by storytellers who couldn't separate technology from magic. So was the Golden Fleece real? In a way, yes, not as a single shimmering hide, but as a testament to human ingenuity. The ancients didn't need magic to conjure gold, they had something just as powerful: the restless drive to turn nature's secrets into legend. And sometimes the truth behind those legends is more fascinating than the stories themselves. Homer's Odyssey paints a terrifying picture: a hulking, one-eyed monster named Polyphemus who devours Odysseus's men in a cave on a remote island. For centuries, scholars assumed the Cyclops was pure invention, a nightmare conjured to test the hero's cunning. But what if this legendary brute wasn't dreamed up at all? What if ancient Greeks stumbled upon something strange, something that made them believe giants with a single eye once walked the earth? The answer might lie in a handful of weathered skulls. Across Mediterranean islands like Crete, Cyprus, and Sicily, archaeologists have uncovered fossils of an extinct species, dwarf elephants. These creatures stood barely a meter tall, remnants of a time when their ancestors crossed land bridges during ice ages, then shrank over generations due to limited resources. But it's not their size that's startling, it's their skulls. At the center of each, a massive nasal cavity yawns where the trunk once attached. To an unfamiliar observer, this gaping hole could easily resemble a single, enormous eye socket. Imagine a Greek farmer in the 8th century BC, plow scraping against bone. He unearths one of these skulls, the domed cranium twice the size of a human's, with that eerie central hollow staring back. With no concept of paleontology, he'd assume it belonged to a monstrous humanoid, a race of giants wiped out by the gods. Even the placement makes sense. Homer's Cyclops were said to be master smiths, and these fossils are often found near volcanic areas where early Greeks mined metal. The connection would have felt chillingly obvious, but the evidence doesn't stop at speculation. Ancient texts hint at this confusion. The Greek geographer Solinus described giant bones uncovered in Sicily as proof of the Cyclops' existence, while medieval travelers to Cyprus recounted locals mistaking elephant femurs for the limbs of mythical creatures. And in a twist of irony, the very name Cyclops might hold the key derived from Greek words meaning round-eyed, a perfect description of that gaping nasal cavity. Of course, not every scholar agrees. Some argue the myth predates these discoveries, rooted in older Near Eastern legends of one-eyed demons. Others suggest the Cyclops symbolized primal forces, like volcanic eruptions, their single eye echoing the fiery wrath of mountains. But perhaps the most compelling detail is how effortlessly the pieces fit. The dwarf elephant theory doesn't just explain the Cyclops, it reveals how myth often springs from misunderstood reality. So were the Cyclops real, not as towering cannibals, but as whispers in the dirt, bones that sparked stories, fossils that fueled legends. And in that way, Homer's tale endures not just as fiction, but as an accidental record of humanity's first encounters with the deep past. When the ancients looked at those skulls, they saw monsters. Today, we see something just as remarkable, the birth of a myth carved not from imagination alone, but from the earth itself. From the ashes of ancient Egypt rises a creature of fire and rebirth, the phoenix. This legendary bird, said to burst into flames only to emerge rejuvenated from its own ashes, has captivated imaginations from Greek poets to Roman historians. But its origins stretch back even further, to the banks of the Nile, where a similar being called the Bennu bird was worshipped as a symbol of the sun, resurrection, and the cyclical nature of time. At the Temple of Heliopolis, archaeologists have uncovered carvings of a heron-like bird perched atop a sacred Ben stone, the same mound from which creation itself was said to spring. This Bennu wasn't just a myth, it was deeply tied to real-world rituals. Priests burned incense at dawn to honor it, mirroring the bird's legendary association with sunrise. Some scholars argue the Bennu might have been inspired by the actual Bennu heron, a now extinct wading bird whose migratory patterns, disappearing and reappearing with the seasons, could have symbolized renewal. Others see solar symbolism in the flames, linking the phoenix's cycle to the sun's daily death at dusk and rebirth at dawn. The Greeks later adapted the tale, adding dramatic flair. Herodotus described the phoenix as an eagle-sized bird with radiant gold and crimson feathers, visiting Egypt every 500 years to bury its predecessor in an egg of myrrh. But here's where science casts an intriguing shadow. Recent studies of ancient Egyptian texts suggest the flames might have been metaphorical, a poetic nod to the bird's vivid plumage glowing like embers in sunlight. Even the idea of rebirth could trace back to the Nile's annual flooding, which stripped the land bare only to fertilize it anew. Yet the phoenix's legacy isn't just about birds or celestial cycles. It's a testament to humanity's obsession with cheating death, with finding hope in the idea that endings are just disguised beginnings. Whether as a heron, a solar metaphor, or a literal firebird, the phoenix endures because it speaks to something universal, the unshakable belief that from destruction, life will always find a way to rise again. Sailors have whispered about the Kraken for centuries, a monstrous beast lurking in the frigid depths, its massive tentacles capable of dragging entire ships to a watery grave. The Norse sagas described it as a creature so vast, it was mistaken for an island when it surfaced, only to pull unsuspecting sailors under when they tried to land. But what if this terrifying legend wasn't born from pure imagination? What if the Kraken was inspired by something very real, something that still haunts the ocean's darkest corners today? Enter the giant squid, a creature as elusive as it is enormous. For years, these deep sea dwellers were as mythical as the Kraken itself, known only from mangled carcasses washed ashore or tangled in fishermen's nets. But modern science has confirmed their existence and their staggering size. Some specimens measure over 40 feet long, with eyes the size of dinner plates and tentacles lined with serrated suckers strong enough to leave scars on sperm whales. Imagine a medieval sailor glimpsing such a beast, its arms thrashing in the waves, its body darker than midnight. How could they not see a monster? The evidence linking the Kraken to giant squid goes beyond mere size. Norwegian fishermen's logs from the 18th century describe encounters with creatures eerily resembling the squid, their limbs coiling around boats in a death grip. Even the behavior fits. Giant squid are known to rise from the depths when injured or dying, just as the Kraken was said to surface in moments of upheaval. And then there's the eerie similarity in location. The Norse tales place the Kraken off the coasts of Norway and Greenland, precisely where giant squid are most frequently spotted today. But here's where the story twists. The Kraken wasn't just a mindless predator. Norse legends often portrayed it as almost cunning, a force of nature that could vanish as suddenly as it appeared. This matches the squid's elusive nature. Even with modern technology, live sightings are vanishingly rare. The ocean's depths remain a frontier we've barely explored, and in that vast unknown, the line between myth and reality blurs. So was the Kraken real, not as a ship-swallowing demon, but as a colossal, misunderstood creature that ignited the human fear of the deep. The next time you hear a tale of tentacles in the dark, remember, the truth might not be so different from the legend. It's just waiting for us to dive deeper. The haunting song of the sirens is one of Homer's most chilling creations, a melody so beautiful. It drove sailors to wreck their ships upon jagged rocks in desperate pursuit. In the Odyssey, Odysseus, warned of their lethal allure, orders his crew to plug their ears with wax while he's lashed to the mast, forced to endure their call without acting. But what if these deadly enchantresses weren't just poetic imagination? What if they were born from something far more tangible, like the bleached bones of ancient creatures, half buried in coastal caves? On the rocky shores of Sicily and other Mediterranean islands, strange skeletons have surfaced for centuries, skulls with gaping eye sockets, elongated spinal columns, and rib cages splayed like wings. To modern paleontologists, these are clearly the remains of Miocene-era whales, ancestors of today's cetaceans that once swam these waters over 5 million years ago. But to ancient Greeks stumbling upon these unfamiliar fossils, the interpretation would have been terrifyingly different. A whale's skull, with its large, forward-facing nasal cavity, could easily resemble the twisted face of a humanoid creature, especially when weathered by salt and time. Imagine a sailor discovering one of these in a sea-smoothed grotto. The bones eerily arranged by currents, what else could they be but the remains of monstrous beings who lured men to their deaths? Even the sirens' behavior in myth mirrors the peril of real maritime hazards. Many Mediterranean islands are fringed with hidden reefs and sudden drop-offs where currents pull ships toward disaster. Their song might have been a metaphor for the deceptive calm of certain coves, where wind patterns create an eerie, whistling resonance through the rocks, a siren's call in the most literal sense. And consider Homer's description of their island, strewn with the rotting corpses of past victims. Could this be a distorted retelling of actual shipwrecks, where bloated bodies washed ashore near whale graveyards, creating a gruesome association between bones and death? But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Later versions of the myth, like those in Roman poetry, describe the sirens as part bird, not fish, a shift that might reflect changing interpretations of the same fossils. A whale's vertebrae, when fragmented, could resemble avian talons, while its scapula might be mistaken for a skeletal wing. Over time, as these stories spread inland far from the coast, the details likely mutated further, blending with other myths of harpies and furies. The real tragedy, some scholars argue the sirens' original purpose wasn't even malevolent. Early vase paintings depict them as muses, their songs not meant to kill but to impart divine wisdom, knowledge so overwhelming it could destroy those unprepared to hear it. Perhaps the shift from scholars to seductresses says more about the fears of later storytellers than the original myth. So were the sirens real, not as singing monsters, but as a warning carved in bone and stone. They're a testament to how the ancient world tried to explain the unexplainable where science hadn't yet reached. Imagination rushed in. And in the echoing cliffs and fossil-strewn beaches of the Mediterranean, it's easy to hear the whispers of that fear even now. The next time you read of Odysseus straining against his ropes, remember, the sirens might not have sung, but the sea itself has always had a voice, one that speaks through the relics it leaves behind. The Tower of Babel stands as one of the Bible's most iconic warnings, a tale of human pride and divine retribution. According to Genesis, humanity once spoke a single language, united in their ambition to build a tower so tall it would reach the heavens. But their arrogance angered God, who scattered them across the earth and confounded their speech, creating the world's many languages. For centuries, this story was seen as purely symbolic until archaeologists unearthed the ruins of Babylon and found something astonishing: the massive stepped ziggurat known as Etemenanke, or the foundation of heaven and earth. Rising from the heart of ancient Babylon, Etemenanke was a seven-tiered monument, its base stretching nearly 300 feet on each side, crowned with a temple dedicated to the god Marduk. Cuneiform tablets describe its construction under King Nebuchadnezzar II in the 6th century BCE, boasting of its height and splendor. To the Jews exiled in Babylon after the destruction of Jerusalem, this towering structure would have been impossible to ignore, a literal stairway to the gods built by a king who famously declared, "Is not this great Babylon that I have built?" The parallels to the biblical story are striking, but here's where the plot thickens. The Bible's account likely merges multiple layers of history and memory. Earlier ziggurats, like the one in Sumerian predate Babylon by centuries, suggesting the myth could reflect older anxieties about urbanization and cultural upheaval. Even the name Babel plays a dual role. While the Bible links it to the Hebrew word for confusion, in Akkadian, it simply means gate of the god, further tying it to Etemenanke's sacred function. Excavations in the early 20th century revealed more tantalizing clues. Etemenanke's ruins showed signs of sudden abandonment, with bricks scattered as if construction halted mid-effort. Some scholars argue this mirrors the biblical tale of the tower's unfinished state, while others point to Alexander the Great's attempts to rebuild it before his death as evidence of its enduring symbolic power. The real genius of the Babel story lies in its universality. It's not just about a tower, it's about the tension between unity and diversity, ambition and humility. Whether inspired by Etemenanke or older ziggurats, the myth endures because it speaks to a fear we still grapple with today, that our greatest achievements might also be our undoing. And in the crumbling bricks of Babylon, we're left to wonder, were the ancients warning us or simply telling their own story? The Bible paints Tarshish as a distant, almost mythical land, a place so rich, its ships brought back silver, ivory, and apes for King Solomon's court. The prophet Jonah even boards a vessel bound for Tarshish when fleeing his divine mission, as if it represented the edge of the known world. For centuries, scholars debated its location, with theories placing it as far as India or the Americas. But recent discoveries along Spain's southwestern coast suggest the answer might have been hiding in plain sight all along. Enter Tartessos, a name etched in ancient Greek texts as a realm of unimaginable wealth, ruled by a king so generous he gifted visitors with silver thrones. Classical writers like Herodotus described its capital as a maze of canals, its people masters of metallurgy who traded with Phoenician merchants. For years, Tartessos was dismissed as legend, until archaeologists began unearthing gold jewelry, inscribed steels, and even a ceremonial bronze chariot near modern-day Hulva. The artifacts bore a script unlike any other in the Mediterranean, a blend of Phoenician and local symbols hinting at a culture both distinct and deeply connected to broader trade networks. The most compelling evidence came from the mud. Core samples taken from the Guadalquivir River delta revealed layers of ancient shipwrecks and Phoenician pottery, dating to the same era as biblical references to Tarshish. Among the finds was a Phoenician pendant inscribed with the word Tarshish, found just miles from Tartessian ruins. Could this be the smoking gun? Linguists point out that Tarshish and Tartessos share the same root meaning, place of refining, a nod to the region's famed silver mine. But the plot thickens beneath the marshes. In 2019, ground-penetrating radar detected the outline of a vast circular structure near Hulva, a possible temple or palace matching descriptions of Tartessos' grandeur. Nearby, the ruins of Cancho Rono reveal a complex with altars still stained by animal sacrifices, their walls adorned with motifs of sunbursts and bulls, sacred symbols in Tartessian culture. Yet the mystery of this lost civilization's disappearance lingers. Around 500 BC, Tartessos vanishes from historical records. Some blame Phoenician conflict or Roman expansion. Others point to a catastrophic tsunami as sediment layers show sudden flooding. Perhaps the most haunting clue comes from a Tartessian stele, its inscription still untranslated but bearing a symbol repeated like a warning, a ship sinking beneath waves. Whether Tartessos was the biblical Tarshish or simply its inspiration may never be settled. But the deeper we dig, the clearer it becomes. This wasn't just a city. It was a bridge between worlds where Mediterranean traders exchanged goods with Atlantic cultures, where myth and history blurred into one. And in the silent gold of its artifacts, we catch a glimpse of a people who thrived at the edge of legend, only to slip back into the shadows. The Chimera, a nightmare stitched together from lion, goat, and serpent, its very breath a torrent of flame. Homer's Iliad describes it as a thing of immortal make, a monster so terrifying, even the hero Bellerophon needed divine help to slay it. For centuries, this creature was dismissed as pure fantasy until travelers to ancient Lycia, modern-day Turkey, stumbled upon something impossible. Flames erupting from the earth itself, burning ceaselessly for thousands of years. These are the Yanotash fires, a cluster of natural gas vents on the slopes of Mount Chimera. Even today, over 24 flames flicker from crevices in the rock, fueled by methane seeping through fractures in the Earth's crust. Some blaze as tall as a man, others dance like ghostly candles in the wind. To the Lycians who lived here, these fires would have seemed supernatural, a beast's fiery breath made manifest. The connection is almost too perfect. Ancient texts place the Chimera's lair in these very mountains, and the nearby ruins of Olympos bear carvings of the creature, its snarling visage watching over the eternal flames. But the science behind Yanotash only deepens the mystery. The gas vents aren't random, they follow a fault line where tectonic forces grind beneath the surface, creating pathways for hydrocarbons to rise. To an ancient observer, this would have looked like the Earth itself was alive, exhaling fire like some slumbering titan. Even the Chimera's hybrid form starts to make sense. The vents emerge from a rugged landscape where lions once prowled. Goats scaled cliffs and snakes slithered through undergrowth. Combine these elements with the unearthly flames and the myth practically writes itself. Yet the most haunting detail isn't the fires, it's how they behave. Unlike volcanoes or wildfires, these flames don't consume their fuel. They burn steadily, undimmed by rain or wind, defying nature's usual rules. Small wonder the Lycians saw divinity here. Later, Roman sailors used the fires as a natural lighthouse, their glow visible from the sea, a beacon that, like the Chimera itself, was both guide and warning. Modern geologists estimate these flames have burned for at least 2,500 years, maybe longer. That means the fires that inspired the Chimera were already ancient when Homer penned his epic. And that's the real magic of this myth. It's not just a story about a monster, it's a record of humanity's first encounters with geological wonders they couldn't explain. The Chimera wasn't vanquished by Bellerophon. It's still there, breathing fire into the night, waiting for us to listen to what the earth is trying to say. High in the windswept deserts of Central Asia, where the Gobi kisses the Altai Mountains, gold miners of the ancient Scythian culture told stories of fearsome creatures, part eagle, part lion, standing sentinel over the earth's treasures. The Griffin, as it came to be known, was no random invention. Its origins might lie in the bleached bones of dinosaurs half buried in the sand, waiting to spark the imagination of those who stumbled upon them. Centuries before modern paleontology, Scythian prospectors tunneling for gold in what's now Mongolia and Kazakhstan would have encountered fossils of Protoceratops, a beaked, four-legged dinosaur from the Cretaceous period. Picture a miner's shock as his pickaxe chips away at rock, revealing a skull with a sharp, curved beak and a bony frill that could easily be mistaken for winged shoulders. The creature's squat, muscular forelimbs and elongated hindquarters might have suggested a lion's body fused with an eagle's head, a perfect match for the griffin's iconic form. Archaeologist Adrian Mayer pieced together this theory after noticing striking parallels between griffin lore and Protoceratops fossils. Scythian art often depicts griffins crouched protectively over gold, just as these fossils are frequently found near ancient mining sites. Even the dinosaur's nesting behavior fits the myth. Protoceratops laid eggs in sandy pits, echoing tales of griffins guarding golden nests, but the story doesn't end with anatomy. The Scythians, master goldsmiths whose intricate animal motifs dazzled the ancient world, had a habit of blending observation with symbolism. A nomadic people, they revered creatures embodying both aerial freedom and terrestrial power, qualities the griffin perfectly encapsulated. When Greek traders later adopted the legend, they amplified its mystique, transforming it into a guardian of divine realms. Critics argue that fossil interpretation requires a leap, but consider this: other cultures have similarly misinterpreted fossils. The Chinese saw dragon bones in dinosaur remains. Native Americans spoke of thunder beasts when unearthing mammoth skulls. The griffin's persistence across civilizations, from Egyptian hieroglyphs to medieval tapestries, suggests more than coincidence. It's a testament to humanity's instinct to weave stories from the fragments of the past, especially when those fragments glitter with gold. So next time you see a griffin perched atop a medieval cathedral or emblazoned on a coat of arms, remember, it might not be pure fantasy. Like so many myths, it could be a fossilized memory waiting millennia for us to dig it up. Hercules' second labor seemed impossible: slay the Hydra, a serpent with 9 heads, where if one was cut off, 2 more would sprout in its place. Ancient texts describe it lurking in the swamps near Lerna, its venom so potent even its breath could kill. But what if this terrifying beast wasn't just a monster from myth? What if it was born from a geological phenomenon so bizarre it turned water itself into a shape-shifting adversary? Beneath the ruins of Lerna lies a network of underwater springs, their flow dictated by seismic activity along the region's fault lines. These aren't ordinary springs, they're karst systems, where limestone bedrock has been eroded into a maze of tunnels and chambers. When earthquakes struck, as they frequently did in ancient Greece, these passageways would collapse or shift, causing water to burst forth from new vents with startling suddenness. Imagine standing at the swamp's edge, watching as a stream you just crossed vanishes overnight, only for 2 more to bubble up yards away. To observers without knowledge of hydrology, it would have looked like the swamp itself was alive, its heads multiplying when disturbed. Even the Hydra's venom takes on new meaning here. The Lernaean springs are rich in sulfur, leaching from the volcanic bedrock below. Sulfurous water emits toxic fumes, especially when agitated, a detail that mirrors the Hydra's deadly breath. Workers in similar springs today report dizziness and burns from prolonged exposure, symptoms that ancient Greeks might have attributed to a monster's curse. And then there's the swamp's eerie resilience. After Hercules killed the Hydra by cauterizing its necks with fire, myths say he buried its immortal head under a rock. Intriguingly, Lerna's springs still occasionally release sulfurous gases, as if something beneath the earth refuses to die completely. The brilliance of this myth lies in its layers. The Hydra isn't just a monster, it's a warning about nature's unpredictability, about forces that defy human control. Each time Hercules thought he'd won, the swamp fought back, just as floods or quakes would have undone human efforts to tame the landscape. Even the hero's final solution, searing the wounds shut, parallels ancient attempts to stabilize springs with heated stones, a desperate bid to halt the water's relentless flow. So was the Hydra real, not as a flesh and blood beast, but as a poetic truth. The ancients didn't need mythology to explain karst hydrology. They needed the Hydra to encapsulate the terror of facing something that couldn't be conquered by strength alone. And in the faint sulfur smell still lingering over Lerna's marshes, we catch a whisper of that fear, the sense that some forces, no matter how deeply buried, never truly stay dead. The great Sphinx of Giza crouches in the desert, its lion's body and human face silently watching millennia pass. According to Greek myth, this colossal statue once posed a deadly riddle to travelers, devouring those who failed to answer. But what if the Sphinx itself holds a riddle far older than the Greeks, one carved not in words, but in stone? Recent studies of its weathered surface suggest this iconic guardian might be thousands of years older than Egypt's pharaohs, whispering secrets of a forgotten age. Geologist Robert Schoch first sparked controversy in the 1990s when he examined the Sphinx's erosion patterns. Unlike the sharp, wind-sculpted grooves seen on other Egyptian monuments, the Sphinx's body shows deep, undulating fissures, the kind typically caused by prolonged exposure to heavy rainfall. The problem: the last time Egypt experienced such consistent downpours was over 7,000 years ago during the Neolithic subpluvial, a period when the Sahara was a lush savanna. If water carved these marks, the Sphinx could predate dynastic Egypt by millennia. The implications are staggering. Mainstream Egyptology places the Sphinx's construction around 2500 BC, attributing it to Pharaoh Khafre. But the weathering evidence suggests it might have already been ancient by his time. Some researchers point to the statue's disproportionate head, theorizing it was originally a lion sculpted by an earlier civilization and later recarved to resemble a pharaoh. Even more compelling, the nearby Temple of the Sphinx, built from limestone blocks matching the statue's base, shows identical water erosion, yet its construction is also credited to Khafre. But here's where myth and geology collide. Ancient Egyptian texts describe the Sphinx as a guardian of sacred knowledge, linked to the god Horus and a lost golden age. Could these stories preserve a distant memory of its true origins? The Arab historian al-Makrizi wrote in the 14th century that locals believed the Sphinx predated the Great Flood, its hidden chambers holding scrolls from a civilization drowned by time. Modern ground-penetrating radar has, in fact, detected anomalies beneath the statue, possible tunnels or cavities yet to be explored. The debate rages on. Critics argue that wind and sand could mimic water erosion, or that the Sphinx's unique position in a hollow exposed it to runoff from the Giza Plateau. Yet the mystery endures because it taps into something deeper than academic dispute. The Sphinx isn't just a statue, it's a time capsule, its scars telling a story that defies our neat historical timelines. Whether shaped by Neolithic rains or Fourth Dynasty chisels, its silent gaze challenges us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the dawn of civilization. And perhaps that's the real riddle, not who built it, but how much history we've yet to uncover. Deep in the mist-shrouded highlands of Colombia, a ritual unfolded that would ignite one of history's most relentless treasure hunts. The Muisca people, a civilization flourishing in the Andes centuries before European contact, gathered at the circular crater of Lake Guatavita, its waters so still they mirrored the sky like liquid silver. At the center of their ceremony stood the Zepa, the chief, his body dusted from head to toe in gold powder. As he stepped onto a raft laden with emeralds and golden figurines, the crowd fell silent. Then, as the raft reached the lake's center, the treasures were cast into the depths, an offering to the gods beneath the waves. This was the origin of El Dorado, the golden man who haunted the dreams of conquistadors. But the Spanish, upon hearing fragments of this rite from captured locals, twisted its meaning into something far grander, a city where gold paved the streets, where every ruler bathed in dusted wealth. The obsession that followed would bleed empires dry and drive men to madness. Archaeological finds at Guatavita reveal how much was lost in translation. Diving expeditions in the 1960s recovered hundreds of gold offerings from the lakebed, intricate pendants depicting jaguars and serpents, miniature masks with hollow eyes, and slender Tunjos figurines representing warriors and deities. Each piece was crafted using the Muisca's signature lost wax technique, a sophistication the Spanish neither understood nor appreciated. To the Muisca, gold wasn't currency, it was sacred, a conduit to the spiritual realm. Their word for it, Tunje, meant light of the sun captured in metal. The disconnect between ritual and greed couldn't be starker. While conquistadors like Gonzalo Jimenez de Quesada drained Guatavita slice by slice, even cutting a notch into its rim to lower the water level, they missed the point entirely. The real treasure wasn't the gold at the bottom of the lake. It was the cultural brilliance that created it. Modern scans show the lake still holds artifacts, but the greater loss was the knowledge buried with the Muisca as their society collapsed under colonial violence. What makes the El Dorado legend so haunting isn't just the misplaced lust for wealth. It's the way a single ceremony, stripped of its sacred context, became a cautionary tale about the dangers of obsession. Even today, the name El Dorado conjures visions of untold riches, yet the truth whispers something far more profound. Sometimes the greatest treasures aren't the ones we dig up, but the stories we fail to preserve. And in the quiet waters of Guatavita, those stories still ripple, waiting to be heard. The legend of the Fountain of Youth has lured explorers and dreamers for centuries, a mystical spring said to restore youth to anyone who drinks its waters. The myth is most famously tied to Spanish conquistador Juan Ponce de Leon, who supposedly hunted for it in Florida in the early 16th century. But the truth behind this enduring tale is far more fascinating than a simple quest for immortality. It's a story of cultural collision, natural wonder, and the timeless human longing to cheat time itself. Long before Europeans set foot in the Americas, indigenous tribes like the Timucua and Calusa revered Florida's crystal-clear springs as sacred sites. These waters, bubbling up from vast underground aquifers, were believed to hold healing powers capable of curing ailments, purifying the spirit, and even extending life. Spanish chroniclers recorded native tales of springs where the sick were restored to health, stories that likely reached Ponce de Leon's ears. Combine these accounts with Europe's own medieval legends of rejuvenating waters, like the mythical fountain of eternal life in the Alexander Romance, and the stage was set for a myth to take root. Yet Ponce de Leon's actual motives remain shrouded in mystery. While later historians painted him as a man obsessed with eternal youth, his original voyage records mention nothing of the sort. He was likely searching for new lands to claim and wealth to exploit. The Fountain of Youth legend only attached itself to him decades after his death as storytellers embellished his exploits. The irony, Florida's springs do possess remarkable properties, not magical but scientific. The mineral-rich waters, packed with sulfur and magnesium, have been shown to alleviate arthritis and skin conditions. To a weary conquistador suffering from the ravages of age and battle, stumbling upon such a place might have felt like discovering a miracle. Modern archaeology adds another layer to the myth. Near St. Augustine, a site now marketed as the Fountain of Youth, was actually a Timucua village centered around a spring, one that early Spanish settlers noted for its purity. Excavations there uncovered remnants of healing rituals, from herb-lined pools to ceremonial offerings. This wasn't just a source of water, it was a pharmacy and a temple rolled into one. Over time, as native knowledge faded and European fantasies grew, the practical healing practices of the Timucua transformed into a legend of eternal youth. The Fountain of Youth endures because it speaks to something universal: the desire to turn back the clock, to reclaim what time steals from us. But the real magic isn't in mythical waters. It's in the way cultures intertwine, how a spring worshipped by one civilization becomes the dream of another. And perhaps that's the true secret the myth hides, that the quest for immortality was never about the water. It was about the stories we tell to make sense of the mysteries we can't control. The Vikings spoke of Ragnarok, a time when the sun would blacken, the earth would shake, and winter would descend without end. Wolves would swallow the stars, gods would fall in battle, and the world would drown in chaos before rising anew. For centuries, this apocalyptic vision was seen as pure mythology, until scientists drilling into Greenland's ice caps uncovered a chilling layer of ash frozen in time. Buried deep within the ice cores, a thick band of volcanic debris dates back to the mid-6th century, a period of unprecedented global cooling. Tree rings from Ireland to Siberia tell the same story: years of stunted growth, as if the very sky had dimmed. Historical records from Europe and Asia describe crops failing, famine spreading, and the sun casting a ghostly haze for months on end. The Norse called it Fimbulwinter, the great winter that would herald Ragnarok. And suddenly, the myth doesn't sound so mythical anymore. The culprit, a volcanic cataclysm of staggering scale. In 536 CE, a supervolcano, possibly Ilopango in El Salvador or Krakatoa in Indonesia, erupted with such force it ejected sulfur dioxide high into the stratosphere, blotting out sunlight across the northern hemisphere. The effects lasted for over a decade, plunging Scandinavia into perpetual twilight. Imagine living through that: winters without summer, food stores dwindling, the very order of the seasons shattered. To the Norse, it wouldn't just feel like disaster, it would feel like the end of days. But here's where the myth takes a darker turn. Ragnarok wasn't just about destruction, it was cyclical, a necessary purge before rebirth. The ash layers reveal something eerily similar. After the 6th century eruptions, the climate gradually stabilized and societies adapted. The Norse, inheritors of these oral traditions, might have preserved ancestral memories of the catastrophe, reframed through their cosmology. Even the timing fits: the volcanic winter coincides with the migration period, when entire tribes uprooted across Europe, as if fleeing an invisible doom. What makes Ragnarok so compelling isn't just its grim spectacle, but its resilience. The Norse didn't see the end as final, they saw it as inevitable, a trial to be weathered. In those Greenland ice cores, we find more than ash. We find proof that the most enduring myths aren't just stories. They're survival strategies, coded warnings from ancestors who endured the unthinkable. And in a world where volcanoes still simmer and winters still bite, perhaps Ragnarok isn't just a prophecy. It's a reminder: after every long night, dawn will come again. In the misty hills of ancient Ireland, storytellers wove tales of Turna and Og, the land of youth, a realm where time stood still and sorrow never touched the souls who dwelled there. Heroes like Oisin were said to have crossed into this other world, lured by its eternal beauty, only to return centuries later, their bodies crumbling to dust upon touching mortal soil again. For generations, these stories were dismissed as poetic fantasy, until archaeologists uncovered Newgrange, a 5,000-year-old passage tomb where myth and stone collide in a way that defies coincidence. The moment you step inside Newgrange's narrow 20-meter passage, the air changes damp, heavy, humming with the weight of millennia. The tomb's most breathtaking feature isn't just its age, but its precision. At dawn on the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, a single shaft of sunlight pierces the darkness, creeping through a perfectly aligned roof box to flood the inner chamber with golden light. For 17 minutes, the beam illuminates intricate spiral carvings on the back wall, as if the very stones were whispering secrets from the ancients. To the Neolithic builders, this wasn't just an architectural marvel, it was a doorway. Modern researchers have mapped the tomb's alignment to celestial patterns, confirming the solstice event wasn't accidental. The builders likely spent generations observing the sun's movements, carving their knowledge into the landscape itself. But here's where the myth blurs into history. Irish lore describes the otherworld as a place reachable only at liminal times: twilight, dawn, or the turning of seasons. The solstice, a threshold between the year's decline and rebirth, would have been the ultimate liminal moment. To witness sunlight penetrating that sacred chamber after days of encroaching darkness must have felt like watching the veil between worlds thin to nothing. The artifacts found at Newgrange deepen the connection. Among the cremated remains and offerings, archaeologists uncovered quartz crystals, stones long associated with spiritual energy in Celtic tradition. Even the tomb's exterior, once studded with white quartz, would have glittered like a beacon under moonlight, visible for miles. It's easy to imagine how such a sight spawned legends, a glowing hill where the dead journeyed, where the living could glimpse eternity. Yet the most haunting detail lies in the myths themselves. Stories like The Voyage of Bran describe the otherworld as an island bathed in perpetual sunlight, where flowers never wither, a stark contrast to Ireland's harsh winters. Newgrange's solstice light, bursting through the depths of December, could have been the literal spark for such tales. For agrarian societies, the sun's return after the solstice wasn't just astronomy, it was salvation. The land of youth, then, might not be a fictional realm, but a metaphor for the cyclical triumph of light over darkness, life over death. Today, as crowds gather each winter to witness Newgrange's solstice miracle, they're participating in something far older than recorded history. The tomb's builders left no written records, but their stones speak volumes. Tir na an Og wasn't just a story, it was a promise carved into the earth and waiting for the sun to bring it to life. And in that fleeting golden light, even modern visitors might feel it, the whisper of an ancient truth that some doors between worlds were never meant to stay closed. The fear of the undead clawing their way back from the grave isn't just the stuff of Gothic novels, it's etched into the very soil of Eastern Europe. Across Romania, Bulgaria, and Serbia, archaeologists have unearthed medieval graves that tell a chilling story. Skeletons pinned down with iron stakes through their chests, stones wedged between their jaws, or heavy rocks piled atop their bodies. These weren't ordinary burials, they were desperate attempts to keep something or someone from rising again. Take the case of the so-called Vampire of Venice, a 16th century woman buried with a brick forced into her mouth. When researchers examined her remains, they found something startling: traces of the bubonic plague. This wasn't an isolated discovery. During outbreaks, mass graves often held victims buried hastily, their bodies sometimes showing signs of premature burial or rigor mortis misinterpreted as movement. Imagine the terror of a medieval villager stumbling upon a swollen corpse, its shroud torn by bloating, its mouth stained with blood from ruptured lungs. To them, this wasn't decomposition, it was proof the dead were feeding. The roots of vampire lore run even deeper. In Slavic folklore, creatures like the strigoi or upia were blamed for everything from crop failures to sudden deaths. These weren't the charismatic nobles of later fiction, but grotesque revenants, corpses bloated and ruddy from feeding, their hair and nails seemingly grown in the grave. Science offers a grim explanation. Natural processes like gas buildup and skin retraction would have made recently buried bodies appear unnaturally lifelike. Add the rampant disease of the time, and it's no wonder communities took drastic measures. But here's where myth and medicine collide. Some anti-vampire burials reveal a twisted logic. Iron stakes through the heart might have been symbolic, a way to nail the soul to the body, preventing its escape. Stones in the mouth could have targeted the tongue, believed to be a conduit for curses. Even the practice of decapitation and placing the skull at the feet finds echoes in folk rituals to confuse spirits. These weren't just panicked reactions, they were elaborate rites, blending superstition with a crude understanding of contagion. Yet the vampire's evolution from folk horror to cultural icon is its own kind of magic. When 18th century reports of Serbian vampires reached Western Europe, they sparked a frenzy, even inspiring Empress Maria Theresa to send physicians to investigate. Their conclusion, mass hysteria and ignorance, but the legend was too potent to die. By the 19th century, Bram Stoker fused these tales with aristocratic flair, giving us Dracula, a far cry from the shambling corpses of peasant fears. What makes these graves so compelling isn't just their macabre details. They're windows into a world where death wasn't an end, but a threat where the line between disease and the supernatural blurred. The next time you read about vampires, remember, beneath the Gothic romance lies a darker truth written in iron and bone. Our ancestors didn't just fear the undead. They fought them, and in the silent earth their battle cries still echo. Long before Hollywood made werewolves the stuff of moonlit horror, Europe lived in fear of real-life wolf men, individuals accused of transforming into beasts, their bodies twisting under the curse of a full moon. Court records from 16th century France and Germany tell of cases like Peter Stump, a farmer executed in 1589 after confessing to wearing a wolf's girdle that granted him animalistic strength and hunger. Witnesses swore they'd seen him sprinting on all fours, his hands clawed, his eyes glowing in the dark. But what if these terrifying accounts weren't evidence of witchcraft or demonic pacts, but something far more insidious lurking in the breadbasket? The culprit might have been ergot, a toxic fungus that grows on damp rye. When consumed, its compounds mimic LSD, triggering violent hallucinations, muscle spasms, and even gangrene symptoms medieval observers could easily interpret as physical transformation. Imagine a peasant in the throes of ergotism, their fingers blackening from restricted blood flow, their mind conjuring visions of fur sprouting from their skin. In a time when mental illness was blamed on supernatural forces, it's no wonder these episodes sparked panic. The evidence aligns eerily with werewolf trial testimonies. Victims often described burning sensations beneath their skin, a symptom of ergot-induced vasoconstriction they might have perceived as the heat of transformation. Others suffered from photophobia, their pupils dilating unnaturally in candlelight, giving the illusion of glowing eyes. Even the timing fits. Outbreaks of ergot poisoning peaked during cold, wet summers when rye harvested in autumn was most likely to mold, coinciding with infamous werewolf panics in regions like the Franche-Comté. Yet the trials reveal more than mass hysteria. They expose how trauma and starvation warped perception. During the Little Ice Age, crop failures left villages desperate, and ergot-infected bread became a grim staple. To communities teetering on famine's edge, the idea that a neighbor could morph into a predator, stealing what little food remained, wasn't just superstition. It was survival logic twisted by hunger and fear. Modern science offers another layer. Ergot's alkaloids can cause psychosis, including lycanthropy, a delusion where patients believe they're turning into animals. Medical journals document cases as recent as the 1940s, proving this wasn't just medieval ignorance. The human brain, under the right chemical assault, can truly convince itself it's becoming a beast. What makes the werewolf trials so haunting isn't the monsters they invented, but the humanity they obscured. Behind every snarling accusation was likely someone suffering, a sick farmer, a traumatized child, or a scapegoat for society's ills. The real horror isn't that people believed in werewolves. It's that sometimes the line between man and monster isn't drawn by magic. It's etched by hunger, poison, and the desperate need to make sense of the unspeakable. The biblical story of Sodom and Gomorrah paints an apocalyptic scene, twin cities reduced to ashes in a storm of divine fire, their sins punished so fiercely that even Lot's wife was turned to salt for looking back. For millennia, scholars debated whether this was allegory or history, until archaeologists began sifting through the ruins of Tall El Hammam in Jordan, uncovering evidence of a cataclysm so violent it rewrote the region's history in an instant. The site, an ancient Bronze Age city-state, lies in the Jordan Valley, precisely where many historians place the lost cities of the plain. Excavations revealed a layer of destruction unlike anything seen in typical warfare. Pottery shards had melted into glass, their surfaces scorched at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Mud-brick walls exploded outward as if hit by a sudden, unimaginable force, while human bones showed signs of extreme, rapid trauma. Most chilling of all, a thin, ashy stratum laced with high concentrations of salt, eerily mirroring the biblical account of Lot's wife becoming a pillar of salt. Researchers initially suspected an earthquake or volcanic eruption, but the evidence pointed elsewhere. Tiny mineral spherules, the kind formed under extreme pressure and heat, dotted the destruction layer. Similar spherules are found at known meteor impact sites, suggesting something from the heavens might have detonated overhead. One leading theory points to an airburst, a comet or asteroid exploding in the atmosphere with the force of a nuclear blast, unleashing a firestorm capable of melting stone and flattening cities in seconds. The timing aligns with the abrupt collapse of civilization across the entire region around 1650 BCE, a period when settlements from Tall El Hammam to Jericho were abandoned for centuries. But here's where myth and science converge in unsettling ways. Ancient texts beyond the Bible echo this catastrophe. The Egyptian Admonitions of Ipuwer describes a time when the sky roared and fire rained from above. Sumerian laments speak of a great white cloud that scorched the land. Even Plato's account of Atlantis' destruction shares uncanny parallels, a prosperous society wiped out in a single day and night. Could these all be fragments of a shared memory, a real-world disaster so cataclysmic it embedded itself in the collective consciousness of every culture downwind? The debate isn't just academic. If Tall El Hammam was indeed Sodom, its destruction reshapes our understanding of how myths are born. The biblical writers may have framed the event as divine judgment, but the science suggests something equally terrifying, a reminder that human civilizations, no matter how mighty, exist at the mercy of forces beyond their control. The ruins don't just tell the story of a city's end. They whisper a warning. Sometimes the line between miracle and catastrophe is thinner than we dare to admit. The legend of King Midas is one of ancient Greece's most enduring cautionary tales. A ruler so greedy, he wished for everything he touched to turn to gold, only to realize too late that such a gift was a curse. Food solidified in his hands, water hardened into metal, and even his beloved daughter transformed into a lifeless statue at his embrace. It's a story about the dangers of unchecked desire, but beneath the myth lies a shimmering kernel of truth. In the ruins of Gordion, capital of the Phrygian kingdom in modern-day Turkey, archaeologists uncovered a royal tomb so laden with gold, it's easy to see how a real king's wealth could spiral into legend. The so-called Midas Mound, a towering earthen tomb dating back to the 8th century BCE, held a wooden burial chamber sealed for millennia. When researchers pried it open in 1957, they found a man in his 60s, likely the historical counterpart to Midas, surrounded by treasures that defied imagination. Bronze vessels, intricate furniture inlaid with juniper and boxwood, and gold ornaments so finely crafted, they seemed to drip from the artifacts like liquid sunlight. The most striking find, a massive bronze cauldron, its handles adorned with roaring lions, filled with a residue of fermented honey, beer, and wine, a final feast fit for a king whose name became synonymous with opulence. But here's where history complicates the myth. The real Midas wasn't a fool blinded by greed. He was a shrewd ruler presiding over a kingdom that controlled critical trade routes between Asia and Europe. The gold in his tomb wasn't magically conjured. It was mined, traded, and meticulously worked by artisans whose skills rivaled Egypt's. Phrygian metalworkers pioneered techniques like granulation, where tiny gold beads were fused to surfaces to create dazzling textures, a craft so advanced it's still studied today. The Midas touch, then, might have been a metaphor for something more nuanced, the transformative power of wealth and how easily it could isolate those who wielded it. The artifacts tell another story, too. Among the treasures were humble items, wooden bowls, simple textiles suggesting Midas's wealth wasn't just for show. It was embedded in daily life, a cultural celebration of abundance. Yet over time, as Greek traders carried tales of Phrygia's riches back home, exaggeration took hold. By the time Herodotus wrote of Midas in the 5th century BC, the king's gold had become supernatural, his name a byword for both fortune and folly. The most poignant twist, modern analysis of the tombs would reveal a hidden tragedy. The logs used to build the burial chamber were felled in the same year, their growth rings abruptly stopping. This wasn't a tomb prepared over decades, it was a rushed response to catastrophe, perhaps invasion, plague, or famine. The real Midas, for all his wealth, couldn't outpace mortality. And that's the deeper irony of his myth. The Greeks painted him as a man who learned gold couldn't buy happiness, but the truth might be even sadder. No amount of treasure could stop time. So was Midas real, not as a man with a literal golden touch, but as a ruler whose legacy gleamed so brightly, it blinded history to his humanity. His tomb isn't just a collection of artifacts. It's a mirror reflecting our own uneasy relationship with wealth, the way it dazzles, corrupts, and ultimately slips through our fingers like sand. In the swirling mists of 19th century scientific debate, a lost continent emerged from the pages of speculation, not Atlantis but something far stranger. Lemuria, a landmass proposed to explain a puzzle that baffled naturalists. Why did lemurs, those wide-eyed primates, exist only in Madagascar and southern India with nothing in between? The answer, some theorized, lay beneath the waves, a sunken bridge that once connected these distant lands. What began as a scientific hypothesis soon spiraled into legend, blending fact with fantastical imagination, leaving traces of truth buried in its wake. The theory took shape when British zoologist Philip Sclater noticed a curious gap in the fossil record. How had lemurs crossed thousands of miles of open ocean to populate these isolated regions? In 1864, he suggested a radical solution, a lost continent which he named Lemuria after the primates it supposedly carried. This wasn't fringe science at the time. Prominent figures like Ernst Haeckel, the German biologist, even speculated Lemuria might be the cradle of humanity itself, a precursor to Atlantis. But here's where geology casts doubt and fascination. Modern plate tectonics reveal a different story. Madagascar and India were indeed once connected, not by a land bridge but as part of the supercontinent Gondwana. Around 88 million years ago, tectonic forces tore them apart, sending India drifting northward while Madagascar remained adrift. The lemurs, ancestors of today's species, were passengers on these slowly separating landmasses, evolving in isolation over eons. No continent sank, the Earth simply rearranged itself, leaving behind clues in the rocks and DNA. Yet the myth refused to die. Occultists like Madame Blavatsky wove Lemuria into their cosmic histories, describing it as a spiritual paradise inhabited by ethereal beings. Even today, alternative historians point to underwater formations like the sunken landmass near Mauritius, known as Mauritia, as possible remnants. The truth: These are fragments of continental crust drowned by rising seas, not the remains of a civilization. So why does Lemuria linger in our imagination? Perhaps because it speaks to a deeper yearning to uncover lost worlds, to fill the gaps in our past with something grander than slow-moving geology. The real story of Madagascar's lemurs is no less wondrous, a tale of drifting continents and evolutionary marvels. But sometimes the most compelling myths aren't those we debunk, but those that remind us how much we still long for mystery beneath the waves. High in the frozen reaches of the Himalayas, where the air thins and shadows stretch unnaturally long, locals whisper of a creature that walks the line between man and beast, the Yeti. Known to Western explorers as the abominable snowman, this towering, shaggy figure has stalked through Sherpa legends for centuries, leaving footprints too large to belong to any known animal and vanishing into the blizzard before it can be seen clearly. But what if the Yeti isn't a mythical being at all? What if it's simply a case of mistaken identity, where rare animals and the harsh terrain conspired to create something far stranger than reality? The first clue lies in the physical evidence, or lack thereof. Western fascination with the Yeti exploded in the 1920s when mountaineers returning from Everest brought stories of giant footprints pressed into the snow. Some even claim to have found scalps or handprints, relics displayed in monasteries as sacred objects. Yet when scientists examined these artifacts, the truth was far more mundane. The famous Yeti scalp kept at the Kumjung Monastery, a ritual object crafted from the skin of a serow, a goat-like antelope, those massive footprints. Often the result of melting snow distorting smaller animal tracks, or in some cases, the broad, splayed paws of the Tibetan blue bear, a rare subspecies rarely seen by outsiders. Then there's the behavior described in local folklore. Yetis are said to be shy but fiercely territorial, emitting eerie whistles or howls in the night. Compare that to the Asiatic black bear, known for its unpredictable temper and haunting vocalizations. In the thin mountain air, a bear's cry can warp and echo, transforming into something unrecognizable. Even the physical descriptions align: shaggy fur, a hunched gait, and an uncanny ability to stand briefly on two legs. To a frightened villager glimpsing such a creature through a snowstorm, the line between bear and monster would blur instantly. But the most compelling evidence comes from genetics. In 2017, researchers analyzed 9 Yeti artifacts, bones, teeth, and fur collected over decades, only to find they matched known Himalayan species like brown bears, black bears, and even a dog. Some samples belong to an ancient polar bear lineage, suggesting hybridization or a lost population that once roamed higher altitudes. These weren't the remains of some undiscovered primate. They were fragments of an ecosystem already teeming with life, just life that science hadn't fully catalogued yet. Yet here's the twist: the Yeti legend endures not because it's been debunked, but because it serves a deeper purpose. For Himalayan cultures, the Yeti isn't just a monster. It's a guardian of the wild, a spirit that enforces boundaries between the human world and the untamed mountains. Sherpa guides still leave offerings in remote passes, not out of fear but respect. In a landscape where avalanches and sudden storms kill without warning, the Yeti becomes a face for nature's indifference, a way to make the incomprehensible feel personal. Science may have stripped the Yeti of its mystery, but it hasn't erased its power. The real magic isn't in proving whether a shaggy giant roams the peaks. It's in understanding how humans, faced with the vast and unknown, will always conjure stories to fill the void, stories that, in their own way, are just as enduring as the mountains themselves. Across the sun-baked plains and riverbeds of Australia, Aboriginal cultures have shared stories of the rainbow serpent for over 60,000 years, a colossal, shape-shifting being that carved the land with its body, brought life-giving rain, and dwelled in sacred waterholes. More than just a myth, this serpentine creator is entwined with the very soul of the continent, its presence felt in every flood and drought. But what if this enduring legend wasn't born purely from spiritual imagination? What if it was inspired by something tangible, a memory of a real creature that once slithered through Australia's ancient wetlands? Enter Unveil narracortensis, a monstrous snake that ruled these lands long before humans arrived. Fossilized vertebrae and skull fragments unearthed in the limestone caves of Narracourt reveal a predator stretching over 15 feet in length, thick-bodied with jaws powerful enough to crush megafauna. Unlike modern pythons, Unveil belonged to an extinct family of snakes called madtsoids, reptiles that had thrived since the age of dinosaurs. To the first Aboriginal peoples crossing into Australia, stumbling upon these bones would have been a revelation. Imagine finding a rib cage as wide as a tree trunk or a skull with fangs longer than a finger, half buried in a dried-up riverbed. How could such a relic not inspire awe or fear? The connection deepens when you examine the rainbow serpent's role in Aboriginal cosmology. It's not just a destructive force, it's a life-giver linked to water cycles and fertility. Unveil's fossils are often found near ancient waterways, places where these snakes would have hunted and thrived. To a culture intimately tied to the land, the idea that such a beast once shaped the rivers and gorges, its body literally molding the earth, would have felt eerily plausible. Even the serpent's rainbow hues might have a basis in reality. Fossilized snake skin, when exposed to minerals over millennia, can take on iridescent sheens, casting prismatic flashes in sunlight. But here's where the myth transcends mere fossils. The rainbow serpent isn't just a snake. It's a spiritual embodiment of nature's duality, creator and destroyer, bringer of monsoons and droughts. Unveil's bones may have planted the seed, but the stories grew to explain something larger: the unpredictability of the Australian environment. In a land where rivers vanish underground and deserts bloom overnight, the serpent became a way to personify forces too vast to comprehend. Modern science adds another layer. Sediment studies show that Unveil vanished around 40,000 years ago, around the same time humans arrived. Did early Aboriginal societies encounter the last of these giants, or were the fossils enough to fuel the legend? Either way, the rainbow serpent endures not as a bedtime story, but as a bridge between deep time and human memory. It's a reminder that myths often begin with a whisper from the earth itself, a whisper we're only now learning to hear. From the misty peaks of Chinese folklore to the fire-breathing serpents of medieval Europe, dragons have slithered through human imagination for millennia. These creatures appear in nearly every ancient culture, often as symbols of chaos, wisdom, or untamed nature. But what if their origins were buried in the earth itself, waiting to be dug up by curious hands? Take China's legendary dragon bones, for instance. For centuries, traditional medicine markets sold fragments of fossilized bone and teeth, ground into powders believed to cure ailments from fever to impotence. Farmers plowing fields would uncover strange, oversized remains and label them long-gooed dragon remnants. Paleontologists now recognize these as dinosaur fossils, particularly from species like the massive Mamenchisaurus or the armored Stegosaurus. To ancient eyes, their elongated vertebrae could resemble a serpent's spine, while their rib cages might suggest the skeletal framework of winged beasts. Even today, the Chinese word for dinosaur translates to Konglong, or terrible dragon, a linguistic bridge between myth and science. Europe's dragon legends took a different but equally fascinating turn. In the 15th century, the discovery of a peculiar skull in the Klagenfurt region of Austria was declared proof of a local dragon slain by a heroic knight. The skull, with its curved beak and hollow eye sockets, was mounted in the town hall as a trophy, until modern analysis revealed it belonged to an Ice Age woolly rhinoceros. Similarly, the fossil-rich limestone caves of Romania, home to extinct cave bears and giant pterosaur remains, likely fed tales of the dreaded Zemu, a dragon-like creature central to Balkan folklore. But perhaps the most compelling link lies in the Nile. Ancient Egyptians feared Apep, a colossal serpent embodying chaos, while Mesopotamians depicted Tiamat as a monstrous, multi-headed leviathan. Crocodile skeletons, with their elongated snouts and jagged teeth, could easily have inspired these myths, especially when found partially buried, their limbs eroded away, leaving only a sinuous spine and skull to fuel nightmares. Even the Draco standards carried by Roman armies, designed to mimic gaping dragon heads, may have been modeled after crocodile remains brought back from Egypt. The dragon's enduring appeal isn't just about fossils, though. These creatures filled gaps in human understanding. Before geology explained earthquakes, what better culprit than a giant beast stirring beneath the mountains? Before volcanoes were understood, what more vivid image than a dragon's fiery breath? The universality of dragon myth suggests something deeper, a shared human instinct to personify the unknown, to give form to the forces that shaped their world. Whether as misinterpreted bones or metaphors for nature's wrath, dragons remind us that every legend holds a kernel of truth. The next time you see a dragon in art or story, look closer. You might just find the echo of a fossil, half hidden in the rock, waiting to tell its own tale. What began as whispers around ancient campfires, tales of monsters, lost cities, and world-shaking catastrophes, have found startling echoes in the dirt and stone beneath our feet. Archaeology doesn't set out to prove myths true, but to listen to what they've been trying to tell us all along. These stories endure not because they're pure fantasy, but because they're grounded in something deeper, the human impulse to make sense of the extraordinary. A fossilized skull becomes a Cyclops, a volcanic eruption inspires Atlantis, a flooded river valley morphs into a global deluge. These aren't lies, they're attempts to explain a world far stranger than early civilizations could fathom. Think of myths as ancient Wikipedia pages constantly edited by generations of storytellers. A tsunami might become a sea serpent's wrath, a comet's fireball could be reimagined as a dragon's breath. The facts warp over time, but the core remains a memory of something real, polished by imagination. Take Troy's layered ruins or the golden treasures of Colchis. They don't validate every detail of Homer's epics, but they reveal how even the wildest legends often flicker with the light of truth. Yet the most thrilling question lingers: what undiscovered connections still lie buried? Could the lost labyrinth of Egypt hide beneath the Giza Plateau? Might the bones of giants in Native American lore belong to an unrecognized megafauna? Every myth is a starting point, not an end, an invitation to dig deeper. So the next time you hear an old tale, don't dismiss it as mere fiction. Ask what real-world mystery might have sparked it, and who knows, maybe your favorite legend, whether it's the city of El Dorado or the beasts of Beowulf, is waiting for its archaeological counterpart to emerge from the shadows. The past is far from finished speaking. Now it's your turn. Which myth do you think hold hidden truths? Drop your theories below, and let's keep the conversation as boundless as the stories themselves. After all, history's greatest discoveries often begin with a simple question: what if?